Got dreams of being a professional podcaster, but have no idea what you're doing?
This is impossible.
That's about to change.
A new kind of school.
Welcome to the Pod School Podcast.
Hello, welcome to the show. Today, numbers. Everybody's favourite topic behind monetization. Money and numbers. That's what everybody wants to know about with podcasting. And because podcast download numbers are secret and only you know unless you shout it from the rooftops, which most people don't unless they're getting hundreds of thousands of listens, and then hoo-wee, can't shut them up. But if you are starting out and you are hearing only the message of the big podcasters who talk about hundreds of thousands and millions of downloads, which of course they would because that's great marketing material, it's easy to think that you are the only little podcaster in the whole wide world with a small audience. So today I wanted to put your mind at ease. I get asked the question about podcast download numbers a lot from people, and I think it really does get to podcasters when they're starting out and can make you feel a bit crummy when you look at your numbers and you're like, oh, I thought I was going to have 1 million people in there and it's very, very small. But you will be very surprised to know that your numbers are probably a lot better than you think. There is no ideal number of downloads. There is no number that you say, if you are at this level, you are a good podcaster. But there are some numbers that we can look at that are relative. So Rob Walsh is VP of Podcast Relations at Libsyn, and he does a podcast with another host, Elsie, and they often will talk about the stats that Libsyn are seeing. And Libsyn is one of the biggest podcast platforms. They have tens of thousands of podcasters. So it's a pretty good reflection in terms of the industry as a whole. So obviously the numbers are only looking at their podcasts, but I think it's pretty much applicable across the board. So take a seat, because something tells me you are going to be surprised, and I'm hoping delighted when I list through the most recent numbers that Rob dropped on the feed, which is Libsyn's podcast. Here we go. If you have over 123 downloads after 30 days of releasing a podcast episode, your show is better than 50% of podcasts out there. That's right, 123 downloads, not 123,000, 123 downloads, better than 50% of the podcasts. Immediately, on hearing that one stat, I am hoping that you realize that your show is not as bad as you may have thought it would be. So the fact that you only really hear about what people's numbers are when they hit sort of stratospheric heights can really make it seem like your small show is not good enough. And I'm here to tell you that it is. If you have 123 listeners and they are engaged and interested and love your content, then that is something worth turning up every week for. I often say to people that you are better off thinking about your audience as a room full of people than thinking about it as like masses of numbers. So think about if you were going to just speak at an event and you wanted to turn up and you had 50 people in a room, would you be happy? You probably would. If you had 300 people in a room, would you be happy? You'd probably be super happy. Of course, if you had tens of thousands, great. But when you're starting out, think about it like that. I am speaking to a room full of people, and if I was standing out in front of a group, would 10 people be enough? Yes. I've spoken to 10 people before or taught 10 people, and it is a lovely, intimate experience. So don't get so caught up in this idea of needing tens of thousands of listeners. It's important to note that some of the shows that are doing that, have been just chipping away at it for a long time and are delivering content consistently, and it takes a long time to build up that audience. In other cases, they are shows that are part of major networks that have big relationships with Apple that can get constantly featured on their shows and are constantly topping into the charts and have huge email lists and social media networks and all of that stuff that helps to increase the number of downloads that you have. So if you're an independent podcaster, don't compare yourself to a big professional network. Really think about your audience. Do you have people that love your show? Are they turning up consistently? Are they engaging with you in other ways, maybe social media, in your review section or via email? And then just make your show for them. If you are getting 123 downloads, you are better than 50% of podcasts out there. To continue with those numbers, if you have over 1,000 listens for each episode, you are better than 80%. You are in the top 20% of podcasts. If you have over 2,900, you're better than 90%. If you've got over 6,600, you're better than 95%. And then it jumps up with over 17,000, you're better than 98%. And with over 30,000, you are in the top 1% of podcasts. So maybe better than isn't the great way to say it. Maybe the top 1% or the top 2%. or if you are over 1,000, you're in the top 80%, or if you're over 123, you're in the top 50%. So go a little easy on yourself. Cut yourself some slack. If you've just started out and you're growing your audience slowly, don't think that just because you've got 100 listens that your show is not a success. Turn up for those 100 people. If you had them in a room, that would be a pumping event. So think about it that way and keep on showing up for them and creating great content. And don't get down on yourself just because there are people out there piping up about their hundreds of thousands of downloads. I hate to break it to you, but some people are very successful and some people lie. So just look at your own analytics, engage with your own audience, have a think about how those numbers compare to the industry as a whole, and feel a little better about yourself. I hope that's talked you out of throwing in the towel if you were thinking, stuff this. When am I going to get my 1 million listeners? Do not worry, your small audience is fine. If you would like a little help with your podcast and you want to be taken through things step by step, make sure you check out my online podcasting course, Pod School. You can find all of the details at podschool.com.au. I'll see you next week, and until then, happy podcasting.
That's all for today.